Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Nedarim, pages 54 through 60, Nun Daled through Samach. Hanoder min hayerek. If a person makes a neder, a vow, not to eat vegetables, mutar bidluin, he's allowed to eat gourds. However, Rabbi Akiva says, forbidden, not allowed to have gourds. So the question is, why yes and why no? The Tanakama, the sages, said to Rabbi Akiva, if a person sends out a messenger to the marketplace and tells the messenger, buy for me some vegetables, and the messenger doesn't find any vegetables, but only finds gourds, he comes back and says, well, I couldn't find any vegetables, but at least I found gourds. As far as the sages are concerned, that proves that gourds are not in the category of vegetables. However, Rabbi Akiva says, no, the exact opposite holds true from that story. Because after all, the messenger would not come back to the sender and say, well, I didn't find vegetables, but I found legumes, because everyone knows legumes is nothing at all related to vegetables. However, he would come back and say, I found gourds, because gourds are close enough to vegetables that they're basically in the same category. And therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, if you make a neder not to have vegetables, you also cannot have gourds. Nun Hey, 55. If a person makes a vow not to eat from the fruit of the land, he cannot have any fruits. However, he can have kmeinu petriot, truffles and mushrooms. But if he says, Kol gedulei karka alai, all that grows from the ground is forbidden upon me, then he can't even have truffles and mushrooms. So we have a challenge to this from the realm of blessings. What is the bracha on fruit that grows from the ground? Borei pri ha'etz, or borei pri ha'adama. On truffles and mushrooms, however, you say, Shakol nihya bidvaro, because it doesn't really grow from the ground. So how could we say that if that which grows from the ground is forbidden upon me should include mushrooms? To which the Gemara responds, well, granted, it grows from the ground. However, it doesn't get its nourishment from the ground. It gets its nourishment from the air. And thus, it is in the category with Dulei Haaretz, despite the fact that the bracha is Shakol nihya bidvaro. Nun Vav, 56. If a person makes a vow not to enter into a certain city, he is allowed to enter into the Sabbath boundary of that city. Now bear in mind the Sabbath boundary, the Tchum, is 2,000 cubits away from the edge of the city. So it's pretty far away. It's close, but not that close. However, the person who made the neder cannot enter into the ibur, the extension of the city, which is only 70 2/3 cubits. That's very close to the city, and thus included in the neder. However, if a person makes a neder not to enter into a certain house, he cannot enter from the doorway to the inside. But as for from the doorway to the outside, that is not included in the neder, and a person would be allowed to enter into that area. Nun Zayin. Amar Rabbi Yanai. Batzal shel truma. If you have an onion of truma, Shenatu, which was replanted, verabu, and grew in the ground. Gedula alikaro mutar. If the majority of the new onion is growth, more so than what was originally there, mutar, it is no longer forbidden as truma. It's now a new entity. Nunchet. Kol davar, sheyesh lo matirin. Anything that has a permitter later on. Kegon, for example, tevel. Tevel's untithed produce. Well, it has a permitter in the sense that if you tithe the produce, it's now good to eat. Umaaser sheni, vehekdesh, secondary tithe, or stuff that was donated to hekdesh, which could be redeemed. Vechadash, or new grain, which will become old grain once you pass the date of the Omer offering. Lo netnu behem chacham shir. The sages did not give a measurement with which to nullify a forbidden mixture. Because why? I don't need a measurement to nullify the mixture, since at some point later on, this will be permitted anyway. However, those things which have no permitter at a later date, you go in truma, like for example, truma will always be truma, utrumas meiser, or the 10th of the 10th, v'chala, the donation to the Kohen from the dough, v'orla, fruit of the tree from the first 3 years, v'kilei kerem, or that of forbidden admixtures. Now, the sages did give a measure with which to nullify this forbidden admixture. So basically the idea is that we don't want to rely upon a shear, a certain measure of nullification, and so we won't when we don't need to, namely in situations of matirin, of later permitters, but when we have no recourse, we have no choice, we'll rely upon this notion of nullification. Nun Tet, 59. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Litra betzalim shetikna uzra'a v'taseret lefi kula. If a person had a certain measure of onions that was rectified, its Shumat and Masrot were given, uzra, and then you plant it in the ground, and there's growth, and of this growth, of this new item, there is partly the old material and partly the new material. Well, the old stuff had already been tithed. The new stuff has not been tithed. However, in determining how much tithe you have to give of this new item, we say it's based upon the entire amount, despite the fact that some of it was really old and already tithed. But rather, mitaseret lefi kula. 60. Samach. Rabbi Natan Omer. Kol hanoder ki'ilu bana bama. Anyone who makes a vow, it's as though he builds a high place for the offering of korbanot. Bear in mind that bamot were usually forbidden. In the history of Klal Yisrael, there were only limited times when bamot were technically allowed. In the days of the Midbar, there was only one Mishkan. In the days of Gilgal, 14 years, it was possible to have bamot. In the days of Shiloh, for 369 years, bamot were forbidden. In the era of Nov and Givon, when the tabernacle was in those locations, bamot were again permitted. Once the temple was constructed in Jerusalem, bamot, high places, a private altar in one's backyard, remained forbidden forever. So, building a bama is a big no-no. So when we compare making a neder to building a bama, this is to say we don't want people making nedarim. It's religiously inappropriate. And if you fulfill your neder, it's like you offered incense on that bama, that high place, which makes it even worse. So, in fact, if you make a neder, you have to fulfill it. This statement in the Gemara is just a shot across the bow, a warning. We don't want you to take nedarim. Even if you think you're going to fulfill them, we'd rather you avoid this topic altogether. Everyone have a great week.